Hi everyone, it's Niall from windowsnoob.com, and today I'm going to talk about escrowing BitLocker recovery information to the Configuration Manager database during OSD and before you even log in. This is a request that a lot of people have been looking for and waiting for natively within Config Manager without using PowerShell scripts and hacks and whatnot. And finally, it's here. So if you follow me on Twitter, you will see that I have a pinned tweet at the moment where I link you to a blog post explaining exactly how it needs to be done. And in fact, I include some history here and talk about the PowerShell script method, which people used to use in the good old MBAM days. But that PowerShell script caused a problem when Configuration Manager 2103 was released, and basically it was a policy storm, and that policy storm caused issues for quite a few customers. But now there is a even better fix, and that is the ability to natively enable the escrow of that recovery information to the Configuration Manager database using a simple checkbox, right? So I go into a lot of details in the blog post. You should take a look at that. I show you how to troubleshoot it as well. Well worth checking out. And if you're using Twitter, please follow me. There is my handle right there. Okay, let's get stuck into it. To start off with, we'll look at the Configuration Manager console itself. And this is Configuration Manager 2203 Technical Preview. Okay, so this was released a couple of days ago. And basically, the new features in the technical preview, they're released every month. But the feature I'm talking about today is this one here, BitLocker key escrow during a task sequence. So there's two things that you need to keep in mind before even trying this. And those two things are the requirements, right? So I'll just go back to the blog post itself. And in there, you'll see under prerequisites, you need to either create an encryption certificate in the site database, and I'll link to it, right? And it brings you to the official docs website telling you how to do that. Or you need to create a BitLocker management policy and opt in to plain text key storage on the client management tab. So what's that about? Okay, if we go back to Configuration Manager, Assets and Compliance, go to our BitLocker management node and either create new BitLocker management policy or edit one that's been previously created. Now, when you create your first ever BitLocker management policy and go through the various tabs, one of the options you'll have is to put a check mark here on allow recovery information to be stored in plain text. If you select that on the very first BitLocker management policy that you create, then that is the setting that will stick with that site. Conversely, if you select to use the SQL certificate, which is the other method, then this option will not be available to you at all. But I'm using the recovery information stored in plain text in Configuration Manager's database. So now that you know what the requirements are and you've enabled BitLocker management policy, it's time to take a look at your task sequence, right? So I've a bunch of task sequences that I've already created just for this. So if we start historically with this one here, using PowerShell, and this was when we used to use a PowerShell script, which I've blogged about, which basically escrows the key to the Configuration Manager database as part of OSD itself. Only problem is that this method caused issues when Configuration Manager 2103 was released, as I pointed out earlier. So, what's the solution? Well, the solution is don't use that method anymore because it's no longer supported. All right, so we can forget about using the invoke-mbam client deployment PowerShell script, even though it actually still works. in Configuration Manager 2203 and later. Right, so let's look at this, okay? If we look at the Enable BitLocker step in a task sequence in Configuration Manager 2203 or later, you will see a new setting, and that is right here. Choose where to store the recovery key. Usually you've got one choice of Active Directory Domain Services, which is AD. The other option is the Configuration Manager database. This is the new feature right here, and it's as simple as a checkbox, just like that, right? And you must store the key somewhere, so it has to be either Active Directory Domain Services or the Configuration Manager database, or both, right? Or of course, you can choose do not store the recovery key, which would be a very dumb thing to do, because as soon as you have a problem on that device, you won't be able to recover it because you have no recovery key. So we can basically do a test and see exactly how this works. All right. So what I will do is I will PXE boot a virtual machine, and that's what's happened here. And this one has nothing installed in it at all. It's blank. What we're going to do is pull down the policy right now, and we're going to select one of those task sequences we were just looking at. So I think this one would be a good one to choose. Configuration Manager, TP2203, because here it's going to escrow the key to both AD and Configuration Manager. This particular task sequence will only upload the key to Configuration Manager, and this one will only upload it to AD. And this one finally will use the PowerShell script to escrow the key, which, remember, is not supported. So let's go and do this method. So off I go. The rest is automatic. What happens here is it's going to format the drive and then actually do something called pre-provision BitLocker. So why don't we do this? So off it goes. It's doing its thing. Let's see, where's the search field? There it is. Okay, let's see what we have here. Parsing step. Get beyond that. There we go. So here it pre-provisions BitLocker, and in the pre-provision BitLocker step, in the task sequence, we can actually set a few things like the type of encryption we want, and in this case, it's XTS AES 256. All right, so that's a useful thing to do, and you can see it does that there, and off it goes and successfully completes the action pre-provision BitLocker. But what's next? Obviously, it has to apply the operating system. That takes a couple of minutes in this on-prem environment, which is a lab. And once that is done, it will set up Windows and Config Manager, and then escrow the key to Configuration Manager. But I want to prove it to you that that's happening. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a file on C called pause.txt, because in the task sequence, we're actually looking for that file. Pause.txt. And the reason we're doing this is to prove that the key is uploaded to Config Manager's database before OSD is complete. In other words, before you log in. And that's what everyone's looking for. Before you log in, it's BitLockered, and the key is uploaded to Configuration Manager. Okay, let's close that. And that should give us our little file on C, dir C. And there it is, pause.txt. All right, so if we go back to the task sequence itself, just to show you what I'm talking about, there is a step there called pause task sequence if C : pause.txt exists. And basically all it does is it pops up a command prompt and it waits until you close that command prompt. And because it's continue on error, when you close the command prompt, it will continue. But this will only run if this file exists. So this is a useful way of doing some troubleshooting to see what's going on. And as you can see, this is the last step in the task sequence. So as soon as we close this, we'll then be presented with the login screen. So, okay, what else can I point out while this is installing? Well, you'll see that the MDOP agent, which is the MBAM MDOP agent that we're used to seeing, is not required for this. It's not needed at all. If you want to install it, go ahead, but it is not needed for this. Secondly, the PowerShell script is not needed either, and it's not supported. So going forward from Configuration Manager version 22.03 and later, if you want to escrow the key to Configuration Manager's database as part of OSD, simply place that checkbox in there. Okay? All right, so let's go back to our VM and see how it's coming along. All right, it's nearly done. Let's just close these out of the way so it can continue. And it'll do the usual hardware detection phase in setting up Windows. While we're waiting for this, why don't we start up SQL? The reason we're going to do that is to prove that the key is going to be added. You can see the time there, it's 10:26 a.m. Seattle time, I think that is. And let me just find the table in question. Recovery, here we go. This one. Yep. dbo.recovery and hardware core _ keys. Just right click on that one and choose select top 100 rows or 1000 rows. And as long as you don't have more than 1000 records in there, it will list all of those records. And as you can see, the latest record is 31, and that is dated yesterday. And what we have here is the recovery key ID and the recovery password, recovery key, I should say. The recovery key itself, you will see, is not in plain. I mean, it is in plain text, but it's what's the word? It's encoded so that you can't read it. You'd need a special hack to read that. I'm not going to tell you how it's done, but it's not too hard if you think about it. Okay, so let's go back and check the status of this one. All right, here we go. So as it says, it's just a moment. Let's see, can we bring up a command prompt? Or is it rebooting again after setting up Windows? Yes. So I guess at this point it's going to start configuring the config manager client agent. Yes, it is. So I'm pressing F8 at this point just to see the status of BitLocker. And what we can see here is that it's 100% done. That's the pre-provisioned BitLocker step. There's the encryption algorithm, which we specified in the pre-provisioned BitLocker step. And key protectors, none found, because it hasn't stored that information in the TPM yet. We can also do this. Error, no key protectors found, of course. So soon it will get to the enable BitLocker step. Once it's finished installing and configuring the configuration manager client agent. And once that's done, we'll be able to list the key protector. And we will see, or should see, that the key protector is the TPM, this section here. And once we see the recovery information, we'll be able to verify in the database that it has indeed uploaded that key. So I just closed that prompt because the task sequence should pop up a new one anyway. and off it goes. And this particular step, at least when I tested it the first few times, it can take quite a few minutes, certainly longer than 5 minutes. And you'll probably be wondering, but why? The reason I found after reading the logs is that when it checks back to the MP to see is the recovery information stored there, if the answer it gets back is that it didn't find the recovery info, it will pause. It'll just wait for 5 minutes and then it will check again. So, and it will keep doing that. I don't know what the retry level is or at what point it's going to fail. Maybe that's governed by the timeout value in the actual task sequence step. But it certainly will keep retrying until it finds that recovery info. So why don't we look at the log file again? Of course, we don't have CM trace in this one, so let's try Notepad. Notepad, c:\Windows, CCM, logs. Let's have a look at this. Just see what info is in there right now for the Enable BitLocker step. And that'll be the step that we're currently on. And what we can see is, let's see, requesting the recovery key status. And this is where it requests it from the management point itself. And here's the ID of that request. And I'll open this up in CM Trace afterwards, and we'll get a much better view of how this looks. But basically, you can see, let's see here. Yeah. So the task sequence that I used for this one here, as you can see, it says AD plus CM. So that means it's going to store the recovery key in Active Directory and Configuration Manager. And this is the new recovery info switch, I guess you could say, for the Enable BitLocker step. And you will see that depending on what you choose in that step in the task sequence, this PWD or password value will change. So because we've selected both AD and Config Manager, it lists AD_CM. Interestingly, if you only select Configuration Manager as the place to store the recovery key, it will say Config Manager, not CM. Okay, so let's close that. I think it's doing the 5-minute pause right now. Let's just double check that and see, does it actually state 5-minute pause? Let's see. Yes, there it is. See that? Checking again in 5 minutes. Key not escrowed yet. So it's coming. We just have to be patient. And luckily, because this is a video, I can fly through this part. Okay, so as you can see, the 5 minutes is done and dusted, and it is pausing. And the reason it's pausing is because we want to prove that it has stored the key in the Configuration Manager database before the login screen appears. So let's do that. And here is the recovery information. And we can see there's the numerical ID and password. So here we have 31 records before that task sequence kicked off on that client. Let's run the query again. We should now see 32. And we do. There it is. And as you can see, there is the recovery key ID 477029. And if we go back here, we can see there it is, 477029 E2 and so on. So basically what we have proven here is that the recovery data, the recovery information from this computer is stored in Configuration Manager's database before the login screen appears. So perfect. That is exactly what we wanted it to do. Job done, I'd say, and only with a checkbox. And in fact, we can go one step further. We can look at the Active Directory computer itself. Domain controller. Log into that. Because remember, we said we're going to store it in Active Directory as well as Config Manager. Now I'm not sure which device this one's going to be. Let's see. NQN. All right. NQN, this one. And if we look at BitLocker recovery, we can see there's today's date, the time. Look at the time, it's 10:37. So it actually was, it actually escrowed the key at 10:30, at least to 80. And there's the recovery key information. It's all there. So it's both in Active Directory and it is in Config Manager's database, exactly as we requested, because we selected 2 places to store it: Active Directory domain services for a domain joined system and the Configuration Manager database. So there you have it. The ability to escrow the recovery information to Config Manager's database as part of a task sequence before the user even logs on. So that is fantastic. It's a great new ability that's now native to Config Manager. I think you're going to see it very soon in the current branch product, very, very soon. So if you want to try it right now, download the technical preview and get testing. Read my blog, of course. All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.